Thank you, Stacey, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everybody and welcome to the webinar. I'd especially like to welcome everyone who's listening from outside the UK. So every year, around 200 people trained as veterinary nurses outside the UK contact myself or Mashad to find out more about being registered veterinary nurse. During these webinars, we hope to reach out to anyone considering coming over to the UK to work as a veterinary nurse, as well as employers thinking about employing someone trained outside the UK. We aim to explain why registration is required and what someone needs to do before they can enter the register. It's important to note that the information that we give today is up to date today in October 2017, but is always subject to change. So if in doubt, please contact Mashad or myself on vnoverseas@rcvs.org.uk if you require further information. Our contact details are contained on a later slide, so don't worry if you missed that. Okay, that's just what we look like if anybody's wondering.
Okay, so the number of registrations are currently at 540 veterinary nurses from outside the UK. So they're all on the RCVS register. The number of applications is increasing each year. As you can see, most nurses come from Ireland, which is not surprising given close vicinity to the UK. However, we do have a large number who trained in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and Portugal.
So the first thing I'm going to cover is why you need to register in the UK. So in the UK we have the Veterinary Surgeons Act, and this details who can carry out acts of veterinary surgery and sets out the system for regulation. So section 19 of the Act indicates that veterinary surgeons, so members of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, may practice veterinary surgery. And veterinary surgery is defined within the Act as somebody, veterinary surgery means the art and science of veterinary surgery and medicine, and without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing shall be taken to include the diagnosis of diseases in and injuries to animals, including tests performed on animals for diagnostic purposes. It also includes the giving of advice based upon such diagnosis and the medical or surgical treatment of animals and the performance of surgical operations on animals. There is provision within Schedule 3 of the Act which allows veterinary surgeons to delegate acts of veterinary surgery to RCVS registered veterinary nurses and RCVS enrolled student veterinary nurses. And Schedule 3 makes it clear that delegation is limited to giving medical treatments such as administering medication, catheterisation and blood sampling, but that isn't a full list. There are many form. And nurses may also carry out minor surgery not involving entry into the body cavity, but all of those procedures need to be delegated via a veterinary surgeon. So in the UK, a registered veterinary nurse is someone whose name is recorded on the register of veterinary nurses maintained by the RCVS. A student veterinary nurse is someone who is enrolled with the RCVS for the purpose of their training. So RVNs are subject to the RCVS Code of Professional Conduct. If you are interested in working in the UK, I strongly recommend that you read Supporting Guidance 18 and 19 of the Code of Professional Conduct, and this outlines of registered veterinary nurses, student veterinary nurses and members of the practice team who are not registered. So I hope by now you have an understanding that if you do not register, then your role in a veterinary practice will be limited to that of an animal care assistant. This is a valuable role, but veterinary surgeons have no specific legal dispensation to act in the Act to delegate to someone not on the register. And this is regardless of how well trained or experienced you may be. You will therefore not be able to use all of your skills that you've covered during your education and your previous employment. We occasionally receive information from people trained outside the UK indicating that they are already working in a UK veterinary practice, and veterinary surgeons are delegating medical treatments and minor surgical procedures to them. This is usually justified by the delegating veterinary surgeon saying that the nurse was supervised. This is, as I said earlier on, not acceptable. I'd like to make it very clear that delegation is not permitted to anyone who is not registered or enrolled as a student veterinary nurse. In some circumstances, permission has been given in the form of temporary student enrolment or a period of supervised adaptation, and we're going to cover both of those areas later on. So before I leave this slide, I'd like you to consider a situation where a veterinary surgeon trained outside the UK comes to the UK. I doubt that a practice will permit them to carry out acts of veterinary surgery before they are registered with the RCVS. This should be no different for veterinary nurses. If you are in doubt, please contact either myself, Mishad, or the RCVS have an advice team who can also answer any queries regarding what somebody can do if they're not on the register or enrolled. Mishad's going to take you through how you actually are able to apply to go onto the register.
Okay, so if you have decided to register as a veterinary nurse, I'm sure you're now wondering what you need to do next. If you or someone you know is trained as a veterinary surgeon outside the UK, you will be familiar with the RCVS procedures, where we accept veterinary surgeons as members where they're trained in the EU or where there is a reciprocal agreement in place. However, the process of registering veterinary nurses trained outside the UK differs significantly. Firstly, there are no agreements in place, and secondly, the EU legislation, which identifies which professions have the right to work as a veterinary surgeon, differs from the legislation for other professions such as veterinary nurses. This is due to the fact that the veterinary nursing profession is largely unregulated in the EU, whilst the veterinary profession is regulated throughout. The application process differs depending on where a nurse trained. There are three main categories. 1, veterinary nurses trained outside the UK. 2, veterinary nurses trained within the UK, excluding the UK. And finally, veterinary nurses trained in an Aquavine accredited school. So I'll cover these categories in the following slides. There is a fourth category where we will consider applications from nurses who hold a qualification achieved outside the UK, which has been accredited by the RCVS in the same way that qualifications delivered in the UK are accredited. Currently, all the RCVS accredited qualifications in the UK, but we are open to talking to schools outside the UK about accreditation. So please contact myself if you have any further questions. So, firstly, the trained outside the EU applicants, we have received numerous applications from nurses trained in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the USA, Canada, and Hong Kong. We have therefore built up information about these qualifications and how they generally address the day one skills and competencies that all UK trained nurses must meet. The Veterinary Nurses Council have agreed that applicants with certain qualifications do not need to supply us with a syllabus, and the outcome of the application is likely to result in being able to proceed to the pre-registration examination. There are no exceptions to this requirement. However, the examination tests the applicant's knowledge and skills are at a minimum level to that expected by nurses trained within the UK. Please be aware that we are aware in some cases nurses are undertaking qualifications via distance learning while working in the UK. It is not possible to complete these qualifications without someone delegating acts of veterinary surgery. Therefore, as indicated earlier, this is not possible. The only qualifications that can be completed while working in the UK are those accredited by the RCVS. So what do you need to provide? Form A gives you the opportunity to provide us details about your training and professional career to date. If you are registered in a country, you are required to obtain a letter of good standing from the registration body. We ask you to send a copy of your certificate and passport or ID card with the application. You will be required to present your original certificate and ID prior to registration. If you are coming to the UK, please remember to pack your certificate, otherwise there will be a delay with your registration. We will consider the length of your training course and your experience, along with references from professional colleagues. These must be people who have worked with you within the last 5 years of your application. If your application is accepted, you will be permitted to work in a practice whilst preparing for your examinations. We call this the period of supervised adaptation. During this time, you may accept delegation of medical and surgical procedures outlined here. Finally, once you have passed the examination, you will be required to attend a registration talk covering legislation in the UK. We hold these talks monthly at the RCVS and usually before or after the practical examination. Okay, so next we have if you've trained outside the EU. So this is for people whose qualification is not listed on the previous slide. You may have to have your qualification assessed. You will need to complete Form A in exactly the same way as other applicants. Because we probably have very little knowledge of your qualification, we ask that you provide an officially translated copy of your syllabus or curriculum. So this will be the teaching document that your school have used to guide their teaching. We understand that translating large documents can be expensive. Therefore, we advise you to contact us to find out if we can help you or if we have a translated copy from a previous applicant. We'll then try to put you in touch with said applicant and see if they are happy to share their document with you. We will also try and assist you to identify the parts which need to be translated. So without the full information about what you were taught, it is unlikely that your application will be accepted. In addition to the syllabus, you will need to provide references from professionals you have worked with, and if you are currently on a professional register, we will need to also receive a letter of good standing. If accepted, the applicant must also sit the examinations and attend the registration talk.
So the next category that we have are nurses who are trained in an ACAVEN accredited school. And I'd just like to mention here about ACAVEN. And ACAVEN is the Accreditation Committee for Veterinary Nurse Education. Someone trained in an ACAVEN accredited school is normally accepted directly onto the RCVS register. ACAVEN is an organisation which accredits schools and other organisations involved with awarding veterinary nurse qualifications around the world. ACAVEN accredited schools and organisations demonstrate that they meet a set of agreed standards, and ACAVEN accredited schools are audited periodically, so they actually have visits similar to that happens in UK veterinary nursing schools. We have agreed at the RCVS that nurses trained in an ACAVEN accredited school will normally have shown that they meet the essential skills and competencies required to enter the register in the UK, and therefore we welcome applications of nurses trained in that school. If you're interested, if you're listening from a school, and I know we have several schools who have decided to join the webinar today, but if you're interested in looking accreditation via ACAVEN, then there are many other benefits to your nurses, not only coming onto our register, but there are other benefits. Please contact us and we'll pass your details on to ACAVEN. They also have a website and I've put their web address on the slide for you. So these are the list of ACAVEN accredited schools. You will see that holders of qualifications from Belgium, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Norway and Portugal may have qualifications that are acceptable. But there are currently 76 schools recognised by ACAVEN. 66 of them are in the UK and the remaining are located in Belgium, the Republic of Ireland, and Italy, the Netherlands, Norway and Portugal. Applicants who achieve their qualification at SLU in Sweden and Hansenberg in Denmark before 2012 may also be accepted onto the register. I'm aware that some employers actively recruit nurses directly from these schools because the applicants normally do not need to do anything else and therefore can easily get onto the register. These are by far the simplest applications process, and therefore the fees have been reduced. So our final category is nurses who have trained in the European Union, except the UK. This is the most complicated to process. All other people that are trained in the UK we need to consider the laws around acceptance onto our register. Applicants are required to complete Form A and B. Remember earlier I talked about providing a translated syllabus. Well, this group of applicants also need to provide one. Again, we will provide guidance. We have a copy of the national syllabus for the Netherlands. which has been translated into English, which we can send potential applicants to assist with their application. It is necessary also that the qualification must be recognised by an education ministry or similar body in the country that the qualification was awarded. If the qualification is not official, then we cannot accept it.
Hi both.
Hello, Don.
I was just struggling to hear you at that point. Are you back?
Okay, can you hear me? I'll take over.
Yes, I can hear you now. Thanks.
Okay, so for applications within the EU, it is rare that applications are not accepted. However, this happens if we feel that the qualification is a lower level than that required in the UK, and our assessor is concerned that the applicant does not have the necessary education to work safely in practice. So that is quite rare. If the assessor feels that somebody's qualification and experience is similar to that expected of a nurse trained in the UK, then it's likely that you will be able to enter the register in the same way that a nurse from Academy accredited school would be able to join the register. And we may be able to advise you at a very early stage in your application whether previous applicants from your school have been accepted onto the register. If, however, our assessor identifies areas in your education and experience which are lacking but still acceptable for going onto the register, they will recommend that the applicant undertakes some remedial work. The EU legislation says that the applicant should be given the option to either complete a period of adaptation with assessment or an examination. And the applicant will get the option between period of adaptation or the examination. Most applicants are required to find employment. Most applicants required to do this find employment in a veterinary practice and complete the registration requirements within a year. A few choose to undertake the registration examination, and I wouldn't be lying. There is varying success with that.
I'm sorry, both. We appear to have lost you again. Oh, Victoria, is that you?
Yes, I'm here, yeah.
Are we back again? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, they're trying to sort out Mishad's computer.
I'm here.
Can you hear both of us?
Yes, I can hear you now, Victoria.
I'll continue. Okay.
Thank you.
So the pre-registration examination, currently all nurses trained outside the European Union must pass a practical examination prior to entering the register. That's regardless of which qualification they have undertaken. The practical examination is in the form of an OSCE, which stands for Objective Structured Clinical Examination. This type of examination is common in the medical and veterinary professions. During this examination, candidates are assessed against the RCVS Day 1 skills of veterinary nursing. The candidates rotate around 10 practical scenarios, all needing to be completed within 10 minutes. You can see sort of some images of some of the scenarios on the screen. The good news is that candidates are provided with a handbook containing all the possible scenarios that could come up during the exam. This helps them to study and to ensure they're at the correct standard for practice in the UK. And the pass rate is currently around 70%, but as I always say to people sitting this exam, it is possible that everybody can pass if they are up to the correct standard. Make that examination available 3 times a year. There is also plans to implement a theory examination, and it's our expectation that that will be launched during 2018 for new applicants. From that we launch it. So if you apply now, and you're told you need to do the OSCE, but you haven't passed that OSCE by the time we introduce that theory exam, you will not need to do that theory exam. So whatever we write on your letter that you need to do, that's what you need to do. But anybody applying after that exam has been introduced will need to complete that examination as well. The exam is likely to be in the form of a multiple choice test, and once this is available, it will be a compulsory element of registration for nurses trained out. Okay, I'm going to try and hand over to Mishad again and see if
It is. I'm here. Don't worry. Okay, so when can I, or you rather, start working within the UK? So by now, you should understand that unless someone is registered or a student, they cannot undertake medical treatment and manual surgical procedures. There is, however, an exception. Someone trained outside the UK may apply to undertake a period of supervised adaptation, or the PSA, and work under the same delegation of supervision of a student veterinary nurse. Someone trained outside the EU will normally apply to enroll for the period of supervised adaptation to allow them to work in a veterinary practice and prepare for their examinations. Someone trained within the EU who chooses to do a PSA rather than the examinations will also be able to enroll. It should be noted that someone enrolled on the PSA cannot use the title veterinary nurse or student veterinary nurse. We advise instead that they use the title of veterinary nursing assistant or veterinary nursing auxiliary to ensure that the public are not misled. The period of supervised adaptation is generally not suitable for someone undertaking locum positions or on a working holiday, especially if the applicant has no intention of entering the pre-registration examinations. So sometimes to accompany the PSA, we also have something called the Nursing Progress Log, or NPL. So this is the final part of the process relating to people trained in the EU who require additional assessment. For instance, if our assessor sees that someone's training and experience is lacking and the applicant chooses not to sit the exam, then we will provide them with a tool to record their competence against the areas of the RCVS Day 1 skills which are lacking. An example of this would be someone who had very little education in theatre practice. They will be required to be assessed against this in practice or undertake an examination. Should they choose to be assessed in practice, they will be provided with the NPL log, the NPL online tool, to record their progress. As with all UK nurses, someone in practice will be required to mentor, normally the clinical coach, so they'll mentor the applicant and confirm to the RCVS that they are competent.
Just going to now cover a little bit on English language requirements. We expect all of our nurses who enter the register to be able to communicate in English. So applicants have an opportunity to declare their ability in English language on their application form, and we treat that very much as a self-assessment. If, however, when we meet you for your registration meeting or appointment, we have a significant doubt about your language ability, we may ask for additional evidence, such as competency of passing an English language test at a level that we will define. So we've covered most of the information now, so I'd just like to recap on what it is you need to produce if you're coming from a school outside the UK. So if you are going to employ somebody or you're coming from outside the UK, then as you can see from the chart here, everybody needs to ultimately bring their original certificates and their ID to the RCVS. We ask that initially we see copies of that. We don't want originals to be delivered to us in the post, and we don't need that until such a time that somebody's being accepted to go onto the register. Everybody is required to produce references, or if somebody has been registered in a country outside the UK onto a register similar to that at the RCVS, we also require a letter of standing. And every applicant needs to apply, but only those nurses who are trained at a school in the EU that isn't Academia accredited, or trained at a school that isn't listed, wasn't on the slides listed earlier, they need to complete Form B and provide a translated copy. The application process takes 3 to 8 weeks to complete from the date that we receive all of the correct information and payment. And just to recap on the possible outcomes, so anybody trained within an Academia accredited school will need to attend the registration talk only and be accepted onto the register. Anybody trained within an EU school may need to sit exams, they may need to do the PSA, and they may need to do the NPL, but equally they may not need to do any of that, but they will all need to do the registration. And anybody trained outside the EU will need to do the examinations, and we will allow them to apply to do the period of super adaptation as an option if they wish to work in a UK practice to prepare them for the examination. They will not, however, need to do the nursing progress log, and we won't make them access that. They will, however, have to attend a registration talk, which we will make available at the RCVS on a monthly basis, and we will also make that available at any examination. So I touched earlier on temporary student enrolment. We get, every year we have applications from or inquiries from people who are training overseas who would like to come to the UK to undertake some work experience. They may have funding through an Erasmus project or maybe wanting to fund this themselves. And we do accept students to be temporarily enrolled with the RCS, but they need to be supported by their college outside the UK, obviously, and we ask the college and the student to complete forms, and we need ID and things provided for that as well. Obviously, if you do not, if you want to work in a UK practice and do not choose to enrol as a temporary student, then it will be limited what you can do while in practice. Applicants who have completed their qualification by distance learning while working in the UK will not be accepted onto the register, as we said earlier, unless permission has been granted by the RCVS to undertake a short period of practical experience in the UK. And we don't define short, but what we don't expect is to be asked if somebody can do their whole of their practical experience in the UK while attending a course outside the UK.
Okay, so if you are considering coming to the UK, you need to consider the cost of applying to enter to the register. Our fees rise every year, so at the moment this reflects the price as of October 2017. So I like to explain that it goes in stages. So for the initial evaluation of your application, for an ACAVIN accredited applicant, it would cost £21, and for all other applicants it would cost £141. If your application has been accepted at that stage, depending on what the outcome of your decision is, you may have to sit the examinations. So for the OSCE examination, it will cost £361, and the multiple choice examinations will be £206, and that is each attempt. Finally, after that, if you pass examinations or your period of supervised adaptation and you wish to apply to the register, for first-time applicants, it will cost £118, and the annual renewal fee will be £64. And I'd just like to point out that you need to be aware of currency exchange rates and any bank fees as well, because we do need to ensure that we have the correct amount before we can proceed with your applications.
So on to the final slide. There's some sources of information. So if you are considering applying to have your qualification assessed, the information is on our website. Equally, we're more than happy to email you the necessary forms. The email address for the VN Overseas at rcvs.org.uk address is there. Alternatively, you can contact us by to speak to any potential applicants via Skype. But we can make those arrangements if you email us, especially if you are contacting us from overseas. And in some circumstances, we'll try to help with timelines. We work at various different hours during the day and evening, so we can contact you during those times. You are more interested in looking at the legislation side of things and checking that you're meeting the right requirements over here, then there's online code of professional conduct, so you'll be able to see what it is you'll be signing up to once you go on to the register. And the email address of our advice team as well. Might be from the UK already and sort of thinking, wondering what you can and can't do, and our advice team will be able to provide you with all that information. And finally, something that we haven't touched on at all, but obviously those of you who are listening will be very much aware that the UK will ultimately be leaving the European Union, and we don't have any information about what's going to happen regarding nurses coming into the UK from the EU, but if you are interested in keeping abreast of that, we do have a task force, and information is put on our website about Brexit and for veterinary surgeons and veterinary nurses coming into the UK from the European Union. So I'd like to thank you for your interest in this topic, and if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy for you to contact us directly.
That's great. Thank you very much to both our speakers for your webinar today, and I'm sure people watching this webinar found it very useful. I certainly learned a lot. Just before we go to questions, I'm sure that most people within the webinar vet community know that I love reading your feedback. So if you could spare 30 seconds to complete the feedback survey that should have popped up in a new browser, that would be great. And I also from reading your feedback that depending on which device you're using to watch the webinar, the survey doesn't always pop up. So if that's the case for you, please feel free to email me using stacey@thewebinarvet.com, and I spell Stacey Stacey. And just whilst we're on the subject of surveys, we also have our annual Veterinary Trust Award survey running at the moment, which is your chance to tell us who's your favourite speaker, which has been your favourite webinar, perhaps this RCVS webinar today. And we've also introduced some new categories such as your favourite animal